Feudalism. In its most general form, the term feudalism has been used to refer to the oppressive social structure in Europe as a whole during the Middle Ages. However, it more accurately describes the specific economic, political, and social relationships between lords and vassals during that era. How feudalism worked. The word feudalism derives from the Latin feudum, or fief, the land given by a lord to a vassal in return for military service. The terms of the contract varied considerably, but generally in granting his vassals land and thus a means to earn money, the lord was then able to equip and maintain a body of armed knights. Such an arrangement added not only to his military might, but also to his prestige, as a large retinue was a clear sign of a lord's wealth and power. In return for an estate and his lord's protection, the vassal promised to fight for his lord, sometimes with the promise to supply additional troops of his own. Some of those troops were levied from men on the fief, but very often those additional warriors were vassals of the vassal, which was an arrangement called sub-infeudation. Typically, a vassal also provided other such services as housing the lord and his men when they visited, joining the retinue when asked, acting as a juror in the lord's court, giving gifts of money or goods for important occasions within the lord's household, for example, when the eldest daughter married or the eldest son became a knight, and even helping to pay the ransom should the lord be captured. The origins of the feudal contract are hard to pin down, but most scholars agree that feudalism owed much of its character to the oaths sworn by Germanic warriors to their chief, a custom still in evidence as late as the Frankish kingdom under Charlemagne at the turn of the 9th century. The Roman and later Frankish practice of granting benefices, or estates, in exchange for military or other services, and in the free surrender of personal property, commonly called an allod, to a lord, who then returned it as a fief. The context for feudal contracts was the series of Viking invasions in the 9th and 10th centuries, when kings were unable to meet every threat and local men with the power to repulse the invaders took a more prominent role in defense. Origins and development. Feudalism, as described here, began around the 10th and 11th centuries in France when the Carolingian dynasty established relationships with local strongmen or installed their own in order to combat invasion from without and strengthen their own positions from within. Previously, the Merovingians had given land from the royal domain to their vassals, but after generations they ran out of land and thus were less powerful than their vassals. In the 8th century, the Carolingians took the crown from the Merovingian dynasty and continued the practice of giving land for service. But they too ran out of land. For example, Charles III was less powerful than many of his nobles because he lacked the land and thus wealth that they had, a situation that he tolerated for stability, but that eventually ended in his losing the throne. Theoretically, the king retained ownership of the land he granted to his nobles, but in time the nobles began to see their fiefs as hereditary. To some degree, they often were. When a vassal died, his son might be able to pay the lord a relief, which acted like an inheritance tax coupled with a new oath of loyalty to the lord. Under King Henry I of England, for example, sons could pay a relief and retain their father's property, something that William II, the previous king, did not encourage. Even minor nobles could pay a relief to their lords and keep their meager holdings. Lords and vassals. The contract between lord and vassal was cemented through the ceremony of homage. In that ceremony, the lord presented his vassal with a banner or a handful of soil, which symbolized the fief, and the vassal swore fealty to his lord. Fealty involved a formal oath, taken publicly, in which a vassal promised to serve his lord and uphold their contract. It was a mutual agreement, one that either party could break in case of a breach of contract. A vassal could break his oath if his lord failed in his obligations. Likewise, if the vassal failed to serve his lord, his fief was forfeit. For example, Raymond, Count of Toulouse, asserted his lordly right against Arnold, Viscount of Le Mans, in the year 1250, when the latter failed to show up in court to account for himself. The Viscount's estates were reclaimed, and he was ordered to pay for the expense his lord went through to punish him. Feudal relationships were complex. In a decentralized state, which most feudal monarchies in the Middle Ages were at some point in their histories, one might have multiple loyalties. In theory, everyone owed their primary allegiance to the king, but with the exception of the oaths taken by Charlemagne's vassals, In actual practice, most people never met the king or served him personally. A king's major lords, like dukes and counts, had vassals. Their vassals had vassals, and so on down the line. Not infrequently, a man might owe allegiance to more than one lord, as most vassals wished to improve their situation, and they knew that to acquire another fief was an excellent source of wealth. In cases of multiple loyalties, a vassal normally had a lord referred to as a liege, to whom he owed primary fealty. However, even that arrangement could be problematic. If a vassal's lord went to battle with another lord to whom the vassal had sworn fealty, he might fight for the liege lord and yet supply troops to the second lord. The feudal contract changed considerably over time. By the 12th century in England, for example, nobles could pay scutage or shield money that exempted them from fighting in person for the king. The money would go to pay for mercenaries. They were still his vassals, but the nature of the relationship had adapted to new circumstances. Kings and even nobles also began setting their feudal relationships down in ink. Complexity of feudalism. Historians today do not consider feudalism a European-wide system. Increasing awareness of the differences between feudal contracts from kingdom to kingdom and from century to century suggests that feudal relationships were much more complex and varied than previously